Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first European Debate Tournament. I am Gianluca.
And I'm Laura.
It's a great honor and pleasure to have you here today for the grand final of this inaugural European tournament.
The motion chosen for today's debate is, as you already know, should the defense of human rights take precedence over the principle of national sovereignty? We picked this topic because it feels especially relevant right now. All over the world and here at home too, the issues has become increasingly important. In these days, public discussions and protests about the Palestinian situation have filled our streets, our media, and also our universities. People are debating the limits of international action. When should our other countries or international organizations intervene? And when should they respect national sovereignty? The issue is complex. On one hand, sovereignty is a fundamental principle of international law. But on the other hand, human rights are universal. They belong to every person, regardless of borders, culture, or government.
Unfortunately, we must recognize that in many countries, human rights are still not fully respected. People are persecuted for their beliefs, their gender, their opinions, or simply for being part of a minority. When that happens, the international community faces a difficult moral question. Should it act, even if that means challenging a national sovereignty? This is why we chose this topic, because it forces us to think about the balance between moral duty and political reality, between the protection of human dignity and the respect for independence. We hope this occasion can be an opportunity for everybody to listen to opposed views on a really felt topic with an open mind and to learn something new and have more tools to evaluate this issue. Finally, we also hope you can appreciate as much as we do how powerful a good discussion can be, not only in understanding others, but also in getting along with them on peaceful terms. Thank you for your attention.
The heirs of the great revolutions had believed in their own slogans on human rights, on freedom, on equality. But by 40 years after the dawn of the 20th century, all the principal currents of thought had taken an authoritarian turn. Thus write George Orwell in 1984. Orwell imagined what the world might look like after the Second World War, portraying the darkest of all the possible futures to warn posterity against the danger of totalitarian drift. But how would we describe the world that followed and the state of health of its rights? So moving to today's motion, should the defense of human rights take precedence over the principle of national sovereignty? We do strongly believe so. Let's define its key terms, as stated by the Cambridge Dictionary. Human rights, the basic rights to fair and moral treatment that every person is believed to have. Precedence, the condition of being dealt with before other things or of being considered more important than other things. National sovereignty, the power of a country to control its own government. Today's motion invites us to restore the only possible hierarchy of human values. We will demonstrate why the defense of human rights should take precedence over the principle of national sovereignty, reminding us that, 1, there are pre-existing rights that everybody inherently possesses as a human being, and 2, states are created precisely to protect and preserve these rights. This motion compels us to reflect on the values upon which we want to build tomorrow's world. Human rights or state centrality? Humanity or power? The answer might seem obvious, but sadly it is not. And we can realize it by simply reading the news. So before moving on to the debate, let's ask ourselves one last question. Will we truly honor the post-war ideals if we allow national sovereignty to take precedence over the defense of human rights? If we put in states' hands the protection of these rights? Thank you.
Imagine you live in a stable and secure community in which, however, only the elderly have political rights and homosexual couples cannot marry. It has been like this forever, and for you it works perfectly fine. In the world promoted by the opposite team, however, your community will soon be invaded by American tanks, because the opposite team wants to put human rights before national sovereignty, always and everywhere. Now, we define human rights by the UN Charter as rights that we have simply because we exist as human beings, and they are not granted by any states. They range from the fundamental, the right to live, to those that make life worth living, such as the rights to food, education, work, health, and liberty. National sovereignty, as defined by the Oxford English Dictionary, is the power of a state or community to govern itself. The right to independence, freedom from outside interference, and self-government asserted by a state or community. And to take precedence is the fact that something is more important than other things and should be dealt with first by the Cambridge Dictionary. Now, we argue that the defense of human rights should not take precedence over the principle of national sovereignty, because we today promote a structured approach instead of an excessive approach. By that we mean that we want to avoid moral obligations and retain freedom of action. Measures that can be taken this way include, for example, trade embargoes or impulsion from institutions like the UN or the EU. Jamie later will also show you that if human rights take precedence over national sovereignty, we will have an increase in interventions, which will lead to an increase of violence. And violence in itself is a violation of human rights. And we are against violence because, as Mahatma Gandhi has already said, when it appears to do good, the good is only temporary. The evil it does is permanent. And because of that, we are against human rights over national sovereignty. Thank you.
What happens when a nation values its force before its people? The most rigid, right-centered constitution in continental Europe today, those of Germany and Italy, by the way, were born thanks to that very realization. States that perpetuated the most horrific violation of human rights during World War II, that once stood as a proof of what may happen when national sovereignty is elevated above human dignity, understood that it was necessary to limit themselves in order to ensure that tragedies like the ones we all know will never happen again. And that lesson should be our guideline today in affirming that the defense of human rights should take precedence over the principle of national sovereignty, as the legitimacy of every state derives from its ability to protect the inherent right of its people. Every single person on this earth shares one defining trait: our humanity. It does not matter whether someone is born in France, Russia, India, or Korea. Before or else, we are human beings. And that simple fact unites us in possessing something far more valuable than our nationality or citizenship: the inherent right to live. These human rights are not created by governments or are not contingent upon geography. They are inherent to every person, everywhere. How could we claim the right to vote if we first did not possess the most fundamental right of all, the right to life? But this principle is not new, nor it is ours alone. Since the Enlightenment, great thinkers such as John Locke or Immanuel Kant have reminded humanity that certain rights, like the right to life, liberty, dignity, belong to every individual simply by the virtue of being human. These ideas became the moral compass of the modern world, shaping the very foundation of international law and the creation of the United Nations. Their legacy lives in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, a document that stands as humanity's collective promise to itself, declaring that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. This leads to our second point. The state is an instrument and not an end. These rights that we discuss, these fundamental human needs, are so essential to our existence that people felt the need to protect them collectively. And from that need, the very concept of the state was born. Even the earliest theorists of the social contract recognized that the state was born out of necessity to protect human life. Thomas Hobbes argued that the state exists to protect human life as individuals surrender part of their freedom in exchange of security and order. John Locke went even further, claiming that people already possess natural rights, life, liberty, and property before any government exists. The state purpose, then, is not to assign these rights, but to safeguard them. After all, why would any of you, as human beings in this room, would choose to surrender a part of their freedom to an authority whose purpose is not to safeguard your life and dignity? The state exists because of these rights, not in spite of them. It was created as their guardian, not as their master. Are we sure we want to leave only to the states the prerogative of safeguarding people's rights? Over the past century, even sovereign states have answered this question for themselves. They have recognized that human rights are the foundation of a stable, shared world. So much that so many have willingly ceded a portion of their sovereignty to international bodies, entrusting them with the task of safeguarding the citizens' rights, like the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, the European Council. This voluntary act proves a simple truth. Sovereignty without protection of human dignity is empty, and authority without accountability is meaningless. Fundamental human rights are not a gift from government. They are a precondition for its legitimacy. Every person comes into this world with equal rights by the virtue of being human. And for this, the state must be their shield, not their master. We have a dream, a world where a kid born in Congo must have recognized the same human birthrights as everyone else in this room. Thank you.
Ciao. First, thank you for your argumentation. I just have a few questions for you. First of all, can you remind me what was your definition of human rights?
Of course. I'll read it to you as a prologue. Human rights, the basic rights to fair and moral treatment that every person is believed to have.
Okay, I understand. Does for you the right to live count as a human right?
Of course.
Does for you the right or the freedom of expression count as a human right?
Yes, it is a human right.
And the right to fair and democratic elections where everyone can participate in?
Yes, it's a human right.
And does the
There
right
are different kind of human rights, though.
And does the right to marry anyone you want also count as a human right for you?
It can be considered, I suppose, but again, there are different kind of human rights. They're considered different generation on different levels.
Yeah, so do you think that different countries count different things as human rights and not as human rights?
No, because there are some basic principles that are the fundamental human rights that are shared all over the world just because we are human.
Okay, do you think Europe or the European countries in general would say marrying anyone is a human right?
They won't everywhere in the world, but again,
Europe,
it's a different generation of human rights. Those rights come after the most basic human rights.
But now I'm asking about Europe specifically.
About Europe?
Yeah.
Repeat your question.
Does the European countries, do you think they count the right to marry anyone you want as a human right?
Yes.
And do you think Saudi Arabia also does count it as a human right?
I suppose they don't.
Okay, thank you. Then I have another question for you also. Do you generally agree that moral standards should be acted upon?
Moral standards?
Yeah, moral standards. So if you have a moral standard, should
What
it
do
be
you
acted
mean?
upon? When you have a moral standard, like human rights to put above national sovereignty, should you act according to that standard?
Moral rights?
Human rights.
Human rights. Should it be acted upon sovereignty?
If you say that human rights are above national sovereignty, do you think?
They're not above, they should come before.
Yeah, they should come before. So
Yes.
you should act accordingly to that theory,
Yes.
or to that moral standard, yes. So when human rights are being violated in any country, you would intervene in this country to save the people in it.
No, that's not what I'm trying to
But
imply.
how would you act upon this moral standard of human rights?
Of
above
protecting
national
human rights in every
Yeah,
country?
Yeah, exactly.
That's why states give up part of their national sovereignty to sovereign national bodies.
Do they do it out of free will?
Yes.
So if a specific country says, I don't want that another country intervenes in my country, it's fine.
That's not the thing. Giving up part of your national sovereignties to a sovereign national institution, for example, the United Nations, the European Union, it's saying that those sovereign national institutions can enforce, for example, or can take away part of the state decisions.
And if a country doesn't give away its national sovereignty to a superficial or a super
Have
organization?
they?
If a country doesn't doesn't give away its national sovereignty, would you...
Practically, they all did.
But if there would be, it's a theoretical question.
It's a theoretical question.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it didn't?
Yeah, if a country doesn't give away its national sovereignty, would you still intervene in this country to save its people?
I guess you could, yes.
Okay, thank you. And another question. You said in your argumentation that countries limit themselves, and that's important. Do you think it is the same for a country to limit itself and another country to force it to limit itself?
There's no countries that are forcing other countries to limit themselves.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
To start our argumentation, it is vital to note that we, on our side, we don't argue against human rights. Quite the opposite, we argue for human rights. We just argue against the approach of our opposition, which in this debate we have referred to as an excessive approach. And they have already admitted in the Socratic Dialogue that once they declare that human rights outrank national sovereignty, they plan on acting upon it, because otherwise this re-evaluation would be pointless. But in practice, that would mean a steep rise of intervention all around the globe. And the reason for that is that according to Amnesty International, 167 countries are currently in violation of the UN Human Rights Charter. Intervening in all these countries would mean an impossible effort. So, even if we still choose to intervene, some nations may agree to a peaceful resolution, but we believe that a great many nations, especially those still under a totalitarian or undemocratic regime, will retaliate massively. That is because if they accord to all human rights, those regimes would practically lose all their power. So of course they are going to resist with all of their military might. A glaring example of this would be the war between Iraq and the US. The goal of the invasion of Iraq in 2003 was to make its people free, to quote George Bush. And yes, it is true that under Saddam Hussein's reign between 1983 and 2006, the European Agency of Asylum links over 400,000 casualties to his regime. However, looking at the conflict that ensued afterwards, the Royal Holloway University of London estimates almost 1 million deaths throughout the war, so more than double. And another 4 million people were forced to flee the region. So in truth, behind the mantle of human rights defense hides a steep increase in violence. It is a cruel irony that the excessive defense of human rights should entail a much larger violation of those same rights, but it is the lesson that reality has taught us. Therefore, if we truly are valuing human rights and the protection of lives, we must choose a structured approach of our side without invading the national sovereignty of countries. And even if we choose option 2 and we only intervene in a select few countries, we would then open the gates for third parties with ulterior motives that influence the decision process of which countries do we actually intervene in. Again, the Iraqi war is a great example, as it was justified partially by the defense of human rights. However, according to former Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan, a large reason behind the attacks was to grab hold of the local oil industry. So, especially lower developed countries can quickly become victims to a similar way of exploitations were we to diminish their national sovereignty. And this perfectly leads to the importance of national sovereignty in itself, because in practice it is the most important boundary preventing invasions and wars between nations, as intruding on a nation's sovereignty will right now, without exception, always be followed with rash consequences. And now if we were to institute an exception, we risk that third parties gain access to exploit a country. So in summary, if we introduce this moral obligation, we will drown in a slur of violent conflicts, we will massively impede smaller nations, and if we truly try to eradicate human rights violations, we need to choose our structured approach. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for your speech. We listened carefully to your speech, and I would like to go deep in it. First of all, don't you think that it might be a little bit dangerous to give no limits to the exercise of the national sovereignty?
We think it is dangerous, yes, but we think it is even more dangerous to give leeway to the countries that are now feeling like they're in a moral high ground to intervene in those countries.
How?
Well, you said you listened carefully. I already explained that those countries intervening will be met with violence. And as you already stated, the most important human right is the right to live. And if we end more lives through intervening than they are ended right now, we actually only made things worse.
You said that we didn't present a structured approach, right?
Exactly.
Then why now you're stating that we have presented a violent structured approach?
No, you have presented an excessive approach, which means that you try to tell us that we should intervene in all countries that right now are breaking.
Then, what's your solution?
Our solution is to try and not intervene, but we try to convince those countries to accord to human rights by other measures, not invading on national sovereignty, like, as Emma already stated, expulsion from the EU or trade embargoes, so something that doesn't immediately lead to violence.
Then, what we have learned from the Holocaust?
The Holocaust is something entirely different right now, because
it wasn't a violation of human rights?
It was a massive violation, of course, and it is important that the people acted.
And
but
what you think?
The Holocaust, please let me finish right now. The Holocaust was a violation also of national sovereignty, because Germany invaded massively around Europe, and that fundamentally differs from what we right now are trying to say, because we say when invading, consequences are absolutely necessary, but if it is not needed to invade, then we don't have to bring more violence to those countries.
So talking about our responsibility, for example, Mussolini wasn't elected democratically.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Those who did those violations of fundamental human rights weren't elected democratically, so using national sovereignty?
I think, I'm sorry, can you rephrase, please?
Of course. If we vote for someone with democracy, then the person has the power to use the national sovereignty. Okay, so don't you think that those people were legitimately elected from this point of view?
Of course,
but you have just said that it was a violation of the principle of national sovereignty.
Yeah, but if a person is elected and then violates human rights, their correlation is not there, because yes, they were elected democratically, but they still have the obligation to then, in their reign, still accord to human rights. Like, there's no correlation here.
Then, what do you think a constitution is?
Constitution is the law that is practiced in a country or a nation.
And don't you think that also talking about Italian constitution and the constitution from Germany, the constitutional rights take precedence over the rights from the parliament?
But then, by that logic, the constitutional rights of a nation would take precedence over human rights,
and
which is on our side.
And don't you call it a limitation of national sovereignty?
I think, are we done, or can I answer?
My last answer.
I think it is definitely an invasion if we invade there. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you.
So thank you guys again for your argumentation. In the prologue, you said that it has been like this forever, and for you, it has always worked fine. Then we would ask you again, why the Holocaust happened? How can you justify that as working fine? We find this suggestion to be a form of historical justificationism, which does not constitute evidence at all. Since men have always worked and women haven't, shouldn't we therefore accept sexism just because society has survived anyway. And when I mean survived, I do not mean thrive. We believe that things must change when necessary, especially in matters of human rights. You mentioned violent intervention and past example as the Iraq wars, but you stated yourself that this war was not because they wanted to preserve human rights, but just to obtain the oil resources present in Iraq, and that was just a mask which was not the true objective of that war. This is a type of strawman argument, replacing real issues with a distorted, exaggerated, and often absurd version that is easier to attack. You built a house by stating how we would do that, but never heard why we shouldn't do that, which I remind you is the topic of this competition. Why should human rights take priority over state sovereignty? You explained why it is impossible, but you didn't explain why shouldn't it be that way. We are supposed to follow the law and not to rely on the undefined nature of human rights. Then what do you think the state should use as the basis for their laws? You took a catastrophic approach without considering the nuances. You immediately assumed that we would use war as a means to enforce human rights, but we never stated that. In fact, we are strongly against war, since protection from war is one of the fundamental human rights. You recognize in the Socratic dialogue the tragedies such as World War II, but you also admit that the solution is constitution. But then we ask you again, what is constitution if not a limitation of state sovereignty?
Okay, thank you. You asked why human rights shouldn't take precedence over national sovereignty. And we not only said it would be because it is impossible, we said it shouldn't because it would lead to interventions which will be followed by violence. On our side, we can intervene in the worst case, but you must intervene always and everywhere where human rights are violated.
You said we accused you of using war to enforce, but we say it's not an accusation, it's pure logic. Because the consequences of your moral obligation is to intervene in countries like that, and this intervention will always be met with violence. So war is inevitable in your scenario.
Yes, exactly. To refer to Emma's case, you are saying that human rights always have to prevail about the national sovereignty. We don't say that national sovereignty always have to prevail about human rights, but they can stand next to each other and we can have case-related decisions. That's possible on our side, it's not possible on your side. So in the Holocaust case, it would be possible to intervene because it was singular, it was the baddest thing that ever happened. It would be possible, but as you self-stated, you can't intervene in a sexist community. If the only thing that happens in an African country is that they're sexist, we can't intervene with military force.
Yeah, thank you. And you also talked about Iraq and that Iraq wasn't about human rights, but it was about oil. But if you hear Bush talk about Iraq, it was only about human rights or mainly about human rights. And it was true that Saddam Hussein also violated human rights. There were human rights violations in Iraq. And America used it as an excuse to say human rights are more important as national sovereignty, to then make it about oil interests. But there were human rights abuses, and America just used it as an excuse. So yeah.
Thank you.
You talked about that the state only exists to protect human rights. And we don't believe this as a fact that can be used in this argumentation. Firstly, I just want to add one quick fact that Hobbes himself, that you quoted, only knew self-preservation as the only human right at all, and he wanted that humans would give all of their rights to the state, and that's not at all what we want. I don't think that you want it to. Also, I think that we have to deal with the fact that states exist in our living world. It's not that now and every time people come together and they found a state because they want to protect their human rights. It is a reality that we have to deal with. And then you said that when a state doesn't fulfill this duty that they have, other ones have to come and fill in. And frankly, that's colonialism, that's violence, that's exactly what we proved on you on our side. But okay, you, on your point, are accepted in it itself. Because you stated that one needs to act upon its values. And that would mean that you would have to intervene in 167 countries on the world that violate human rights. Intervene? Yes, you would have to intervene, because giving up sovereignty to international organizations doesn't exist. The UN is not sovereign. Every member state of the UN is still a sovereign state. And it is debatable on the EU, but that's a singular topic. Every other thing in the criminal court is still sovereign, because you can step back and get out of it. And you yourself defined national sovereignty, that you have the control about your own government, and that is still the case in every country except for the EU countries that are not the main purpose of this debate. So you can't make case-based decisions. You have to intervene everywhere, and if not, your moral ranking is absolutely obsolete. It doesn't help at all if you don't follow it, and I think if you follow it, it's dangerous. Because in your world, the international communities would have no freedom of action. They had to do exactly what they said before, to put human rights above the national sovereignty and act upon it. That means invasion. Thank you.
Thank you for your points. I would like to make a punctuation about the observation made about Hobbes. Of course, we do not agree with the vision of Leviathan in which the states control all of our actions, but it was just an example of how he theorized the birth of a state, because people, fearing for their lives, decide to collectively put their rights in the hand of the state, like to put them in a lock to protect them, in a safe to protect them, not, of course, to destroy them.
Also, you said that with giving precedence to the defense of human rights upon the principle of national sovereignty, which is the position that we are sustaining today, this would inevitably lead to intervention, so wars, soldiers having to leave their home country, tragedies, deaths, forgetting that there are many other ways to guarantee those rights nowadays, for example, with monetary compensation, sanctions, diplomatic and politics means. Fortunately, we live in a civil country in 2025. Thank you.
You also stated that the UN is not a sovereign organization, but that's just simply not true, since UN has many ways to keep states accountable for their mistakes. One of them is in the International Court of Justice, who entered into the picture even when state did not sign the official treaty for its function.
And finally, we would like to give light on the fact that we cannot prove something with a case-based approach. You cannot say that if someone used an instrumental approach to defend the human rights, then it's not true. We cannot say that if someone used violence to protect human rights, it shouldn't be applied. Of course, we wanted to prove, actually, that we should take precedence, the defense of human rights should take precedence over the national sovereignty because of principle, with a right approach, with a balanced approach, and not with violence on instrumentalism. Thank you all.
Today's debate has seen the contraposition of two opposite visions of the world. The opposition has defended an idea of a world where the defense of human rights is up to state, with a structured approach, and which intervention of international organization is pictured as an impossible effort. Furthermore, the opposition has pointed out that guaranteeing human rights upon everything worse could happen. We thank you for your contribution, yet we'll believe in a very different future. We hope for a world, and we have thoroughly supported this through our argumentation, in which the defense of human rights should take precedence over the principle of national sovereignty. A world in which fundamental rights belong to all humans as such, and states acknowledge their mission to defend them. Nothing should stand between the defense and the effective protection of human rights. Nothing should prevent the guarantee of these rights, least of all the states themselves, which were born precisely to protect their citizens. Tom Clark, a US Supreme Court justice, once said, "A right is not what someone gives you, it's what no one can take from you." We believe in a world where, when faced with the choice between humanity and power, between the centrality of rights and that of states, every single person would choose the first. We believe in a world where all the words spent by philosophers, legislators, scholars about human rights are not mere declarations of intent, but genuine, universal programs for action meant to avoid repeating the horrific tragedies of the Second World War. We believe in a world where humankind preserves its humanity, affirming its most primal essence and resisting the Orwellian downfall described in 1984. We dream of a world that posterity will be able to recount as peaceful and free, a world where there's no heaven, no hell below us, and above us only sky. Yes, we dream of a world where the defense of rights does not depend on the strength of a state to impose itself, but where rights belong to everyone, a world where there's no countries, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. You may say we're dreamers, but we are not the only ones. We hope someday you will join us, and the world, finally, will live as one. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the question today is whether violating national sovereignty for human rights actually saves human lives. The fight is between a structured approach on our side and an excessive approach on the opposite side. The other team has shown us the importance of human rights. We agree with that. And the state's obligation to protect those human rights. We, however, argued that if we put human rights over national sovereignty, they necessarily have to follow acts, and those acts have to be interventions, because other measures would not hurt the national sovereignty. And intervention, by definition, is violence. So secondly, if we act, we have to intervene everywhere where human rights are being violated, which is impossible. And thirdly, or lastly, if we only intervene in certain countries, it results in cherry picking, where the focus is not anymore on human rights violations, but other aspects take over the role of deciding which countries are intervened with, such as oil interests. And at that point, what are we even doing? So now again, imagine you live in a stable and secure community in which, however, only the elderly have the political rights and homosexual couples cannot marry. It has always been like this, and for you, it works. This community obviously has got some huge problems, but please, opposite team, don't make it worse in a failed attempt to make things right. Don't kill them for their problems while trying to save their lives. We think, therefore, you should follow our way and not use this excessive approach of the other side. 4 lives, so thank you.